The metallic click of a hammer being pulled back echoed through the Wyoming dawn, freezing Elijah McCrae mid-step as he approached his barn. 18 years of solitary living had sharpened his instincts, and that sound meant only one thing: someone was inside his sanctuary, armed and desperate. His weathered hand instinctively moved toward the Colt at his hip as his pale blue eyes scanned the structure where he'd kept his memories in solitude, safe from the world. The November wind carried the scent of approaching snow across the Laramie Valley, but something else lingered in the air: fear, desperation, and the metallic tang of blood. Elijah had been heading to the barn for his morning routine, the same one he'd followed religiously since Mabel's death in 1887. Feed the horses, check the equipment, avoid thinking about the empty house behind him. But the sound of that rifle being cocked changed everything. His boots crunched softly on the frost-covered earth as he moved closer, noting the barn door was slightly ajar, something he never left that way. The gray dawn light filtered through the gap, revealing disturbed hay and what looked like droplets of something dark on the wooden floor. "I know you're in there," Elijah called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd learned to command respect in a harsh land. "And I know you're hurt. But this is my property, and I need to see who you are." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Then came a sound that stopped him cold, a woman's voice, barely above a whisper, shaking with exhaustion and terror. "Please, don't come closer. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I will if I have to." The voice cracked on the last words, revealing more vulnerability than threat. Elijah paused, his hand still near his weapon, but something in that broken tone reminded him of wounded animals he'd found over the years, dangerous only because they were terrified and trapped. "Ma'am, I'm not looking for trouble," he said, softening his voice slightly. "But you're on my land, and by the sound of it, you're in a bad way. Why don't you tell me what's going on?" He could hear movement inside the barn, the rustle of hay, and what sounded like someone trying to steady themselves against the wooden walls. The morning light was growing stronger, and through the gap in the door, he caught a glimpse of bare feet, cut and bleeding, and the dull metal of a rifle that looked like it had seen better days. "They're coming for me," the woman's voice came again, stronger now but still filled with desperation. "I can't. I won't go back. I'd rather die right here than let them take me." There was something in her tone that spoke of true terror, not the bravado of a common criminal. Elijah had heard that kind of fear before, in the voices of settlers who'd faced impossible odds, and it always meant the same thing: someone was running from something far worse than whatever they might face in his barn. "Who's coming for you?" Elijah asked, taking a careful step closer. The barn creaked in the wind, and he could see the woman's shadow moving restlessly inside. "And how long have you been in there without proper shelter?" The temperature had dropped below freezing during the night, and anyone without adequate clothing and footwear would be suffering from exposure by now. "2 men on horseback," she replied, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "They have a dog with them, trained to track. I've been running for 3 days, and I can't go much further." The admission seemed to cost her something, as if acknowledging her weakness made her more vulnerable than she could afford to be. Elijah stood in the growing daylight, his mind racing. 18 years of isolation had been his choice, his way of honoring Mabel's memory and protecting himself from further loss. But now, faced with this mysterious woman who'd sought refuge in his barn, he felt something stirring that he thought was buried forever. The protective instinct that had once driven him to build this life, to create a safe haven in the wilderness, was awakening despite his best efforts to keep it dormant. The sound of distant hoofbeats carried on the morning wind, still far off but unmistakably approaching. The woman in the barn heard it too, because her breathing became rapid and panicked. Whatever she was running from was getting closer, and Elijah McCrae found himself at a crossroads he'd never expected to face again. The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by the distinctive baying of a tracking hound, and Elijah watched the woman's shadow shrink deeper into the barn's recesses. Her breathing had become shallow and rapid, the sound of someone on the edge of complete panic. Without fully understanding why, Elijah made a decision that would shatter 18 years of carefully maintained solitude. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice low but commanding. "I'm coming in there, and we're going to get you hidden properly. Those men will search this barn, and where you are now, they'll find you in minutes. He heard the metallic scrape of the broken rifle being adjusted, but he pushed open the barn door anyway, stepping into the dim interior with his hands visible and empty. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. The woman huddled in the corner was younger than her voice had suggested, maybe 27, with dark hair matted with sweat and debris. Her dress was torn in several places, stained with dirt and what looked like dry blood. But it was her eyes that hit him like a physical blow. They held the same fierce determination he'd seen in Mabel's face when she'd stood up to claim jumpers trying to steal their land. Clara Whitlow, though he didn't know her name yet, was clearly someone who'd fought hard to survive whatever had brought her here. "My name is Elijah McCrae," he said quietly, crouching down to appear less threatening. "And I'm guessing you're in more trouble than you can handle alone." His eyes took in the broken rifle she clutched. He recognized it as an old Spencer carbine, the kind carried by cavalry during the war. The stock was split clean through, making it useless as anything but a club. "Clara," she whispered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and fear. "Clara Whitlow. And you're right, I am in more trouble than I can handle." She studied his weathered face, looking for signs of deception or threat, but finding only the calm steadiness of a man who'd faced his share of hardships. "Why would you help me? You don't even know what I've done." "I know what running scared looks like," Elijah replied, glancing toward the barn entrance as the sound of approaching horses grew closer. "And I know the difference between someone who's done wrong and someone who's had wrong done to them. Which are you?" The question hung in the air between them as Clara struggled to find words that wouldn't make her sound like every other fugitive who'd ever begged for sanctuary. "I was supposed to deliver a package," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I thought it was medicine for a mining camp up near Cheyenne. But when I got suspicious and looked inside..." She swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she remembered. Rifles. Brand new Winchester rifles, packed in medical crates. When I tried to report it to the territorial marshal, the men who hired me found out. They said I was part of the smuggling ring, that I'd stolen the weapons for myself. Elijah nodded grimly. He'd heard stories of gun runners using innocent people as unwitting mules, then silencing them when they became liabilities. "So you ran, and they sent bounty hunters after you." It wasn't a question. The pieces were falling into place, and none of them painted Clara as anything other than a victim of circumstance and her own conscience. "Two of them," Clara confirmed, wincing as she shifted position and her torn feet touched the rough wooden floor. "They've been tracking me for 3 days. I lost them at the river crossing, but their dog picked up my scent again yesterday evening. I saw your barn lights and thought maybe..." She trailed off, realizing how desperate her plan had been. The sound of horses stopping outside the barn made them both freeze. Elijah could hear men's voices, low and professional, the tone of people accustomed to violence. One of them was giving commands to the dog, whose excited whining suggested it had found the scent it was following. "There's a hidden compartment under the feed bins," Elijah said quickly, standing and moving toward the back of the barn. "My grandfather built it during the Indian Wars. It's cramped, but it'll hide you completely." He began shifting heavy sacks of grain, revealing a wooden panel that blended seamlessly with the barn floor. "Get in there now, and don't make a sound no matter what happens." Clara struggled to her feet, her injured soles sending spikes of pain up her legs with each step. As she lowered herself into the narrow hiding space, Elijah handed her a thick horse blanket. "This'll keep you warm and muffle any sound," he whispered. "I'll handle whoever's out there." The barn door creaked open just as Elijah finished repositioning the grain sacks. 2 men entered, their spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor, and Elijah turned to face them with the calm expression of a man who had nothing to hide. The first man through the door was tall and lean, with cold gray eyes that swept the barn like a predator assessing territory. His companion was shorter but broader, with scarred hands that rested casually on the butt of his revolver. Both wore the hard expressions of men who made their living through violence, and the large bloodhound that pushed between them was already nosing around the barn floor with professional intensity. "Morning," Elijah said evenly, leaning against a support post with studied casualness. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" His tone was polite but carried an undertone that suggested these men were unwelcome on his property. 18 years of solitude had taught him how to project authority without appearing threatening, a skill that had kept him alive during his younger, more turbulent days. "Name's Garrett," the tall man said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "This here's my partner, Dutch. We're tracking a fugitive, woman named Clara Whitlow. She's wanted for stealing federal property and assault on a territorial marshal." He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, presumably a warrant, though he didn't offer to show it. "Dogs picked up her scent leading right to your property." Elijah glanced down at the bloodhound, which was sniffing around the base of the grain bins with increasing excitement. His heart rate picked up, but his expression remained calm and mildly curious. "Haven't seen any woman around here," he said truthfully. "When was she supposed to have passed through?" "Sometime in the last day or so." Dutch spoke for the first time, his voice rough as gravel. "She's dangerous, old man. Killed a lawman up in Cheyenne before she ran. You'd be doing yourself a favor by cooperating." The threat in his words was subtle but unmistakable, and Elijah recognized the tactic of professional intimidation. "I live alone out here," Elijah replied, his tone remaining steady despite the lie by omission. "Closest neighbor is 15 miles south. If someone was trespassing on my land, I'd have known about it." He watched as the bloodhound continued to work around the barn, its excitement growing as it approached Clara's hiding spot. The animal was well-trained and persistent, and Elijah knew it was only a matter of time before it pinpointed her exact location. Garrett stepped closer, studying Elijah's weathered face for signs of deception. "You know, mister." He let the question hang in the air, a clear demand for identification. "McCrae," Elijah supplied. "Elijah McCrae. I've owned this land for 23 years, and I don't appreciate strangers questioning my honesty on my own property." He straightened to his full height, which was considerable, and let a hint of steel enter his voice. "You boys have a warrant to search my barn?" The two bounty hunters exchanged glances, and Elijah could see them weighing their options. They were clearly accustomed to intimidating people into compliance, but they'd encountered someone who wouldn't be easily pushed around. Dutch's hand moved closer to his weapon, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "We don't need a warrant to follow a trail," Garrett said finally. "That dog's trained by the best tracker in Colorado Territory. If he says the woman's been here, then she's been here." As if responding to its cue, the bloodhound began to whine and paw at the floor directly above Clara's hiding spot. Elijah watched the animal's behavior with growing concern, but he kept his expression neutral. "Dogs can be fooled," he observed. "Scent carries on the wind, gets mixed up with other smells. Could be tracking a coyote or a deer for all you know." It was a weak explanation, and everyone in the barn knew it, but Elijah was buying time while he figured out his next move. "Step aside, McCrae," Dutch said, his patience clearly exhausted. "We're going to search this barn top to bottom, and if you interfere, we'll consider you an accessory to federal crimes." He took a step forward, his hand now resting openly on his gun grip. For 18 years, Elijah had avoided conflict, choosing isolation over the complications that came with human interaction. But as he looked at these two hard men who made their living hunting other people, he felt something awakening in him that he thought was long dead. The protective instinct that had once driven him to fight claim jumpers and defend his home was stirring, and with it came a cold anger that surprised him with its intensity. "This is my property," Elijah said quietly, but his voice carried a new edge that made both bounty hunters pause. "And I'm telling you to leave." The tension in the barn crackled like electricity before a thunderstorm. Elijah stood his ground as Dutch's hand tightened on his weapon, but before either man could make a move, the distant sound of multiple horses approaching at full gallop echoed across the valley. All three men turned toward the barn entrance, and Elijah felt a mixture of relief and concern as he recognized the distinctive rhythm of military mounts. "Territorial Marshal," Garrett muttered, his confidence wavering for the first time. "What the hell are they doing out here?" Through the barn door, they could see a group of 6 mounted lawmen approaching, led by a man wearing a marshal's badge that glinted in the morning sun. Marshal Thomas Brennan dismounted and strode into the barn with the authority of genuine law enforcement, his sharp eyes taking in the scene immediately. "Gentlemen, I need to speak with you about your fugitive warrant," he said, his voice carrying far more authority than the bounty hunters had ever possessed. "There's been a development in the Clara Whitlow case." Elijah watched as both Garrett and Dutch shifted uncomfortably, their aggressive postures deflating slightly in the presence of actual legal authority. The bloodhound, perhaps sensing the change in atmosphere, had stopped its excited searching and was now sitting quietly beside the grain bins. "What kind of development?" Garrett asked, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "We have a legitimate bounty warrant issued by the Territorial Court." Marshal Brennan pulled out an official-looking document and unfolded it carefully. "That warrant has been rescinded as of yesterday evening. Clara Whitlow is no longer considered a fugitive. In fact, she's now considered a key witness in a federal investigation of illegal arms trafficking." He paused, letting the implications sink in. The real criminals were arrested in Cheyenne 2 days ago, and they confessed to using Miss Whitlow as an unwitting courier. The silence that followed was deafening. Elijah felt a wave of relief wash over him, not just for Clara's vindication but for the confirmation of what he'd sensed about her character from the beginning. She had been telling the truth, and his instinct to protect her had been justified. Furthermore, Marshal Brennan continued, his gaze hardening as he looked at the two bounty hunters, "We have testimony that you two were hired not by legitimate authorities, but by the same criminal organization to silence Miss Whitlow before she could testify. That makes you wanted men yourselves." The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Dutch's hand moved toward his weapon, but he found himself facing 6 armed lawmen who were clearly prepared for resistance. Garrett raised his hands slowly, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. Within minutes, both men were disarmed and shackled, their bloodhound secured by one of the deputies. As the marshal's men led the false bounty hunters away, Brennan turned to Elijah with a knowing look. "Mr. McCrae, I don't suppose you've seen Miss Whitlow anywhere in the vicinity? We need her testimony to close this case, and we want to make sure she's safe." Elijah glanced at the grain bins, then back at the marshal. "She might be around somewhere," he said carefully. "If she is, I reckon she'll come out when she feels it's safe to do so." Marshal Brennan nodded with understanding. "When you see her, tell her she's not only cleared of all charges, but the territorial government is prepared to offer her a reward for her courage in exposing this arms smuggling ring. She's free to go wherever she chooses, whenever she's ready." After the lawmen departed, Elijah moved the grain sacks aside and helped Clara emerge from her hiding place. She was trembling, not from cold but from the emotional release of finally being free from the terror that had pursued her for days. When she looked up at him, her eyes were bright with tears of relief and gratitude. "You saved my life," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't know me anything, but you risked everything to protect me." "Why?" Elijah was quiet for a long moment, considering her question. "Because sometimes doing the right thing is more important than staying safe," he replied finally. "And because maybe it's time I stopped hiding from the world." For the first time in 18 years, the thought of sharing his life with someone else didn't feel like a betrayal of Mabel's memory, but rather like honoring the values she had taught him. Clara smiled through her tears, and in that moment, both of them understood that their lives had been forever changed by their unexpected encounter in a Wyoming barn. What did you think of this incredible story of courage and second chances? If this tale of Elijah and Clara touched your heart, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of human resilience and unexpected connections. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to help a stranger? Share your story in the comments below. We love hearing from our amazing community. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads, and tell us what kind of story you'd like to see next.